I don't know. I don't.
She said let's start somewhere in the back.
No, let's start something when we get back.
Oh. Listen!
For 4-1, we're going to do inverse trig functions. And the first one we're going to do is an inverse sine function.
I hate most of them. I'm sorry, Ty. I have no shell.
Okay, so.
Oh, okay, I get it now.
GOAT stands
Okay.
for greatest
Yeah,
of all
yeah,
time.
I get it now.
I don't get it either. Okay, fine.
Because,
I still don't get it.
Because.
Okay, so the inverse sine function, it works from -1 to 1. So that's the domain. And so that works for y equals the sine inverse of x. And that comes from the fact that for y, sine of y, if sine of y equals x, that is true from -pi/2 to positive pi/2. Okay, so it's just kind of that if I'm normally just going around a circle, I'd have like the -pi/2 to 2 for my range. So this guy basically is my range. And this guy over here is my domain. That's a D. Okay, so you have to do some stuff like that. So some of the things that they ask you to do and some of the ways that you see this, so these are all called inverse sines. You will sometimes see sine -1 of 1/2, and you'll just be asked to evaluate this. Okay? So this is asking where is the sine, what angle gives you the sine of 1/2. So sine, remember sine is y, which angles gives you a 1/2. So that dude, and it's 30. So you could write 30 or pi/6. Let me look at some of their answers and see how they want them. They would want pi/6. Okay. You can write 30 or pi/6 or just pi/6. So you're going and looking where's this 1/2 happen at in the y value because it's a sine. The other way that you would sometimes see these written out as is arc sine. Arc sine is the same thing as inverse sine. You sometimes just see it on different calculators. So if I said the arc sine of -√3/2. Okay?
Did it go into the case of it, or you have
No, it just landed.
Okay, so where is the sine of a value -3/2? So I'm going to find the -3's over 2's. I have a -3/2, a -3/2. I'm usually just trying to find the most, the closest one. I don't know that they sometimes do 2 or not. It doesn't look like they really ever do 2. So just find the smallest value that's true for. Okay, so what I would want for the sine, the arc sine of -3 pi/2, it would be 5 pi/3. But 5 pi/3 is also the same as -pi/3. Okay, so sometimes they use those coterminal angles. So just kind of get used to those, looking at some of those in the answers when you're looking at them. It'd be okay for either one of those answers. Okay, I guess some of the questions just ask specifically about degrees or radians. So if they asked you for the sine, inverse sine of 1/2, and they asked you that in degrees, you would say 30. It just depends on how they actually write it in the directions for your answer. They just give you both options to do it, okay? So those are what those guys would look like. So just be able to do them. Either this would be 300 degrees or -60. Okay, next thing is cosine. So your inverse cosine function. Sorry.
20 more seconds.
Yep. That's
the video.
gross.
You know what I hate is when the pop-up ads come up on there and it's like cancel or it has like the little X in the corner, but it's the wrong one. It's just like.
Or when they put cancel as part of the pop-up ad.
Yeah, and so you click on that fucker and that takes you there. And you're like, oh, damn it! Oh, no.
It's like that within 5 miles.
I don't know if there's a bitch like that within 10 miles of my house. Get out
So
of here.
inverse cosine.
Oh, somebody's calling me. Hold on. Hello? Help!
Okay, so for your inverse cosine,
That's not what I meant.
your domain again is the -1 is less than x is less than or equal to +1. And your equation for that is y equals cosine inverse of x. And that basically comes from the fact that you would have cosine of y is equal to x. Okay, so these are like interchangeable. So sometimes it's easier to write them one way or the other. We usually write them like this, okay? And that is from the normal pi range of 0 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to pi. Okay, so they want all their answers for cosine between 0 and pi. They want all their answers for sine between -pi/2 and +pi/2. Okay? Okay, so then some of your questions there will look like cosine -1, so inverse cosine of -1. So where do I find a cosine? So remember, cosine is your x value. Cosine being the x value, where is cosine equal to -1? That is at 3pi/2, but that is, since that is greater, then they don't want negatives for any of the cosines either. How about cosines are x values, so it would be pi. So make sure you look at x values when you're looking at cosine. Okay, so at pi. Okay, if your answer said degrees or radians, this would be your radian answer. In degrees, it would be 180 degrees. Okay, so it's just whichever one it's asking you about. The next one is, I'll just do like a couple of these for you guys. So arc cosine, just another way to write inverse cosine of -1/2. Remember, cosines are x values. Where do I find a -1/2 on my unit circle? I have a -1/2 right there from 0 to pi. So for sine, you're only really looking at the right side of the circle. For cosine, you're only really looking at the top half of the circle. Okay, so -1/2 would be 2pi/3. Or 120 degrees. Okay, so that's kind of what you're doing there.
This is the one good thing in my life. You will not lose because of some fuck.
Okay, another one, inverse cosine of the square root of 2/2. So square root of 2/2, cosine is x, so look here, it'd be 45 degrees or pi/4.
So cosine is the y.
Cosine is the x's, sines are the y's.
Yeah, I honestly can't fucking remember if I keep asking. I'm wrong.
I know, that's why I answered nicely,
Whoa.
as nicely as possible. You done writing? Sorry.
What did you
I
do?
do it on the fucking ground. The fucking dip comes blowing out of it like a sumbitch.
Jesus Christ, I've never heard anything more country.
Look at this fucker. I don't know how the hell that happened.
Okay, inverse tangent.
Again. That is a shit pin.
Why do you think I gave it to you?
Okay, remember that inverse tangent is going, oh, I hate those pins. I know what you're talking about. They do that all the time.
How the hell can you throw it?
I don't know,
Oh,
sorry.
now it broke again.
Okay, so inverse tangent. Tangent is grosser because tangent is basically y over x. So it's going to be sine over cosine, so we're using that unit circle. That was a good bouncing pin, though.
Yeah, Christ.
Yeah.
If you like fling it, get a little bit of rotation on it.
Okay, so we can do tangent for any real x. So the domain of tangent is all real numbers. Our equation that we use is y equals tangent inverse of x. The other way that we normally would have seen this written was tangent y equals x. And our range of tangent is, so the range is negative pi over 2 is less than y is less than or equal to pi over 2. Not equal to, just less than. Okay, so some of the questions, so like one of the first questions is tangent, inverse tangent of 1. Okay, so what you're doing, I'm looking for a y over x that would be the same thing. So when it's 1 for tangent, no, you're having to divide y on top. So the only one where those work, where you're going to get your tangents equal to 1, are going to be your 45s. Okay, so you'd have the square root of 2 over 2 divided by the square root of 2 over 2. It's going to be 45 degrees, okay? So pi over 4 or 45 degrees.
Wow, we're not conditioned like you. We all have cars or have rides.
Friends. They have friends. Oh, not funny.
Fuck that.
Yeah.
After you eat, piss on.
Yeah, we got done with the rec center. Had to walk back to the hotel, and the rec center was about a mile away or 3/4 of one.
Fuck him. I would have bought a bike. See you, bitch. I'll sell it later when I get to the hotel.
We'll play against Asians.
I feel like maybe you wouldn't have bought a bike.
Nice. Watch out. Wing Kong Wong. Slam that shit down
Okay.
in their face.
So if I wanted to find the arctangent of the square root of 3, the ones you're going to have that have a square root of 3 in it, you're going to have to actually like figure out that division, make sure it works. So 60, you would do the square root of 3 over 2 divided by 1/2, flip the bottom and multiply to get 2 over 1, and that ends up as the square root of 3.
24.
Okay, so just trying those out, that works. So since that one worked, it would be pi over 3 or 60 degrees.
I guessed on one for today, and you got out in like the 13 and still got me there too, so.
Yeah, they don't care what you got.
Okay, if they don't have square roots, a lot of times I'm going to show you how to type things in the calculator as well. So I guess on the calculator, so just on the calculator, if I asked you to do the inverse tangent of 3, you would just do second tangent 3. Nothing crazy. You write down that answer, 1.24. And I'm pretty sure it does not matter one way or the other what mode you were in. It might matter. It matters, but I want the answers, I guess, in radians.
You hit second tangent?
Yep, second tangent.
What are you talking about?
Well,
Yep, so do the radian answer to get 1.2.
And I'm like chilling at school. That sucks. Yeah, I don't want to stay at school, but to enjoy be home. That's good. I want to be home. School blows. College changes you. Yeah, I'm ready for college.
Nick, come on.
1 through 50.
Nick and my friend